For years, there was a file that remained behind closed doors, a name that came to represent not just one individual, but an entire network of unanswered questions. That name was Jeffrey Epstein. In 2025 and 2026, following renewed legal pressure and transparency rulings in the United States, thousands of documents, photographs, and records connected to Epstein were gradually released to the public. These files do not offer simple answers. Instead, they reveal the scale of a story that extends far beyond a single person. The released materials include flight logs, communication records, handwritten notes, calendars, and various forms of archived media. Some documents are heavily redacted, with names and details obscured, while others remain partially sealed due to ongoing legal considerations or national security concerns. It is important to state clearly that the appearance of a name in these files does not automatically imply guilt or criminal involvement. The documents themselves are records, not verdicts. As the files became public, one question quickly dominated public discussion. Why were these materials kept from view for so long? Epstein was not only a financier, he maintained connections across political circles, business elites, and influential social networks. The newly released documents illustrate how broad and complex those connections were, and why the case continues to attract intense scrutiny years after his death. Jeffrey Epstein's death in federal custody in 2019 did not bring closure. Instead, it deepened public suspicion and left many questions unresolved. The release of these files has not ended the story. If anything, it has reopened it. Each document adds context, but also raises new uncertainties about what remains unseen and undisclosed. What these files ultimately expose is not just a historical scandal, but a broader reflection on power, access, and accountability. They show how influence can create silence, and how truth can remain fragmented when institutions move slowly or selectively. The Epstein files stand today as one of the most disturbing archives of the modern era, not because of what has already been revealed, but because of what may still lie hidden within them. Beyond the documents themselves lies a more uncomfortable reality. Systems rarely fail by accident. The Epstein files suggest patterns that go beyond individual decisions and point instead to environments where accountability weakens as power increases. In many cases, influence does not need to erase evidence, it only needs to delay it. Time, complexity, and public fatigue can be just as effective as secrecy. One of the most striking aspects of these files is not what they explicitly confirm, but how much they leave open to interpretation. Redactions, missing timelines, and incomplete records create gaps that cannot be ignored. These gaps are not proof of conspiracy, but they are indicators of limitation, of how much the public is allowed to see versus how much remains under institutional control. The case also exposes the psychological dimension of power. Epstein operated in spaces where status created trust, and where proximity to wealth or influence discouraged questions. This is not unique to one individual. It reflects a broader dynamic in which authority reshapes perception. When someone appears untouchable for long enough, the assumption of untouchability becomes self-reinforcing. Another unsettling layer is the role of silence. Silence from institutions. Silence from witnesses. Silence created by legal settlements, non-disclosure agreements, and reputational fear. In this context, silence is not empty. It is structured. It has legal language, financial backing, and social consequences. The files hint at how silence can be organized without a single explicit order ever being given. Public attention tends to focus on names, but systems are rarely dependent on names alone. Networks survive replacement. When one figure disappears, the structure often remains. That is why the release of documents, while significant, does not automatically dismantle the conditions that allowed the events to occur in the first place. Transparency without reform risks becoming archival rather than transformative. There is also the question of memory. Scandals move quickly through news cycles, but accountability moves slowly through institutions. The Epstein files challenge viewers to consider whether society is more interested in exposure or in prevention. Knowing what happened is one thing. Understanding how it was allowed to continue is another. Ultimately, these documents force a confrontation with an uncomfortable idea. Justice is not only about uncovering facts, but about whether systems are willing to act on them when doing so is inconvenient. The Epstein files are not just a record of past actions. They are a mirror, reflecting how modern power operates, how truth is managed, and how easily responsibility can dissolve when it is spread across too many hands. And perhaps the most disturbing question remains unanswered. Not who was involved, but how many similar stories never reach this point at all. As the Epstein files circulate, another layer becomes impossible to ignore. The role of institutions whose purpose is to protect the public, yet whose actions often prioritize stability over truth. Large systems are designed to survive scandal, not resolve it. When exposure threatens credibility, containment becomes strategy. Documents are released slowly. Context is fragmented. Responsibility is diluted across departments, committees, and years. This is where justice begins to blur into procedure. Legal systems do not ask whether something feels wrong. They ask whether it can be proven, whether it fits within statutes, whether it can survive appeal. In cases involving extreme wealth and influence, legality and morality often diverge. The files show moments where behavior raised serious concern, yet consequences never followed. Not because evidence did not exist, but because evidence was never allowed to converge. Another disturbing aspect is normalization. Over time, repeated exposure to questionable behavior can dull institutional response. What once triggered alarms becomes background noise. Complaints become paperwork. Warnings become memos. Eventually, inaction stops feeling like failure and starts feeling like routine. The Epstein case suggests this erosion did not happen overnight. It happened quietly, incrementally, and with professional language. Media attention plays a complex role in this process. Exposure can force accountability, but it can also compress narratives into spectacles. Complex systems become simplified villains. When public outrage peaks and then fades, institutions often outlast the moment. The files remind us that visibility alone is not justice. Without sustained pressure, transparency risks becoming symbolic rather than corrective. There is also the question of victims, often mentioned only in passing. In documents and court records, human lives are reduced to identifiers, initials, and redacted paragraphs. The files contain traces of harm, but rarely convey its full weight. This absence is not accidental. Systems are more comfortable managing data than acknowledging suffering. Silence, once again, becomes structural. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that nothing revealed so far suggests this case was unique. The conditions that enabled Epstein, access, deference, fear of consequence, legal insulation, are not rare. They exist wherever power concentrates faster than oversight. The files do not expose a hidden world, they expose a familiar one, operating just beyond ordinary scrutiny. In the end, the Epstein files do not deliver closure. They offer something more uncomfortable: recognition. Recognition that truth can exist without resolution, that documentation does not guarantee accountability, and that the greatest danger is not secrecy alone, but indifference once secrecy is partially lifted. History will record that these files were released. What remains uncertain is whether anything fundamentally changed because of them. The story is no longer about what happened, but about what society chooses to do when confronted with evidence it cannot unsee. And that choice is still being made.